All right. Well, I grew up in a small town in Washington State called Montesano, and um, I would say my first obsession was baseball, which now I don't. I mean, I still appreciate certain aesthetic things about the baseball experience, Major League Baseball, what it feels like to be in a stadium at night, and the smell of the concession stands and all that. But when I was a boy, it was just all consuming. But I realize now that it did have a lot to do with how cool the uniforms were, and I would like obsess over, opening up. I mean, every kid did this in the '80s, but one of the biggest things, and I try to tell my daughters this now, was going through catalogs like JCPenney or Sears catalogs, and just going, of course, when I was 6 years old, to the Star Wars stuff, because once Star Wars came out, that changed everything as far as what the kids played. I was always Luke Skywalker because I had blonde hair, and my friend Scott was Han Solo because he was brunette. But well, I guess yeah. I mean, talking about Star Wars, uh, that movie was so inspirational to us kids that we would play that trash compactor game. We just throw all of our trash into our bedrooms, and the walls were caving in, and you just play that for hours. Now I'm not. I appreciate Star Wars, especially for as nostalgia. But after Return of the Jedi, I never really returned to just having all the action figures. I sold all my action figures actually at a garage sale, so I could buy my first leather jacket at Wilson Leather. That's a true story. And I wore the jacket maybe 5 times before I realized I think I'm punk rock, but I now look like every other pseudo supposed punk rocker. So I didn't wear it very much anyway. But I got off the topic of baseball, which Little League to me was everything. Once you could play Little League. I can't remember what age I was when it started, but again, it had something. I was perfectly good at baseball. I played second base and catcher, even though I was pretty small physically. But it became pretty natural to me. I liked playing baseball, but it became more about the atmosphere and playing a game and at night with the lights on and cheering crowd and girls that I was in love with or whatever, people from school, stuff like that. And now I love sports documentaries. I have a thing about sports, but without being that interested in sports like I was before. I mean, I knew, I had baseball cards, and that was another part of it. And eventually, the baseball and football, and where I came from, every kid, at least most every kid, all my friends played every sport, like basketball, football, and football was painful. When tackle football came along, it was not like it is in watching it. It was completely different being a part of that and getting hit hard. And we've learned several things thanks to movies and TV and media about, and of course, studies about how dangerous football is. But eventually, um, the obsession with that turned to skateboarding, which actually I guess it didn't really happen until eighth grade. So I'm skipping ahead a little bit there. We're talking like 12 years old when I got heavily into skateboarding. Where I lived, strangely enough, Buzz Osborne from the Melvins was the bag boy at my local thriftway. And he and this guy, Jay Lucan, and a couple others who had skateboards early on when I was still, kind of, baseball obsessed. And I wasn't just baseball obsessed. I'm making it sound like that's all I cared about. I also like to draw Batman, just thinking creatively, drew Batman a lot and was obsessed again with the Batman TV show. Later, I loved the Tim Burton movies, and and the Christopher Nolan movies are great. Batman Returns is my favorite of all any kind of. I don't even know why I'm talking about because I'm not a big superhero movie guy. But anyway, comic book movies, superhero movies, Batman Returns is my favorite of all time. But when I was a kid, it was Adam West and Burt Ward, that really campy version, the TV show that was great. It's still fun to watch. And Joel Schumacher, I think, kind of steered Tim Burton's movies later in that direction. He did. It's not maybe, he definitely did. In toward that campy, way over the top kind of aesthetic. But anyway, when I was a kid, I loved drawing Batman. And, I think I was into a little bit darker things. Certainly when everybody was forced to read Where the Red Fern Grows. Everybody read that, I think, in grade school. And then we saw the movie version of it, and that was kind of one of those sort of demystifying the process of turning a book into a film. And there were all sorts of things, of course, hitting me as a young boy, like in between, 5 and 12, including the advent of video stores and being able to see horror films. And I know I'm going all over the place here, but I just thought of one of the first thing I ever rented. The first two movies my sister and I rented were The Making of Michael Jackson's Thriller, which was John Landis behind the scenes, crafting that movie. And I think Michael Jackson had hired him for it because of An American Werewolf in London, which, Rick Baker did all that. And of course, they ended up making a similar, short film of Michael Jackson's Thriller video. Yeah, yeah. Why? It's not that loud.
Industrial areas, having a studio here it's a love-hate thing.
Yeah, wasn't Gearhead right around the corner before?
Yeah, they're up. They're still up. I don't know, a mile away.
Yeah,
up that direction.
Joel Sternkorb, I've known him for like 25 years.
Oh yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Did you ever come to parties here at this place?
I don't think so.
Manifest.
I don't think so.
Manifestation. Yeah, this was a kind of a legendary party place for a while.
It sounds familiar, but anyway. I like that you're in the Southeast.
Let's jump back into it now that we're.
Oh, Michael Jackson's Thriller?
Yeah.
Yeah, the making of Michael Jackson's Thriller. My sister and I rented that, and we rented the collection of Duran Duran music videos. And that'll segue into something, I think, in a second. But the making of Michael Jackson's Thriller was just, the first time it was truly demystified that you could somebody actually makes films and sets up different shots and edits them together. And, and seeing the makeup stuff was the coolest because, and it immediately made me want to do something like whatever Rick Baker did. And later, I'll jump ahead just for a second to 1988, the movie Summer School came out, which is probably a bad film, directed by the late great Carl Reiner. But there were two characters in that, Dave and Chainsaw, who made little horror films. And that was another thing like, whoa, what are they doing? That looks like the most fun thing ever. And, it seemed easy too, watching those guys, make their supposed horror films within that film. But there are some things like that jumped out at me along the way. They were like, oh my God, I need to do something with regard to, motion pictures. But back then, just seeing that Michael Jackson making of thing and seeing all the things it took to make this, this video, it was just mind blowing. Yeah, well, my mom, a good part of me, I'm a huge Simpsons fan, and they on that show, especially in the great 10 or so years where the show was the best thing ever, they talked about, like the kids would make references to the television raised me. And I'm not that it's literal like that, but my mom and I both were, we had similar taste and humor, or I guess she instilled it in me, little nature and little nurture, with regard to, just things that are funny. And my mom also, from the get-go, from as far back as I can remember, she was, she liked to watch shows like Entertainment Tonight and things like that. And I kind of got into the pop culture-y sort of, I don't want to say gossipy, like world of, behind the scenes of Hollywood. And I would always watch of course, I was just into it because it was, fun trash. And it still is, probably. Does Entertainment Tonight even exist? I don't know. But my mom was always encouraging with regard to artsy-fartsy stuff. My dad, they divorced when I was 5. Not as much. He's like, he was a policeman in Aberdeen, and he was had a lumber company. And very simple guy. Certainly nice dude, but never, never interested in anything, with regard to pursuing the arts. But my sister and I, right around the time I was in 6th grade, right about the time we rented those, and I don't mean to segue way off of that, but I don't want to forget this because it was, it was formative. I don't know if it was right. My sister was obsessed with Duran Duran, like loved Duran Duran. And you could tell by her, if you walked into her room, it was all Duran Duran. And she liked John Taylor the most, the bass player, who's a very good bass player, by the way. Although he plays that up high bass, which a lot of people have a problem with. And our first concert, it turned out, I got to go kind of at the last minute, but she and her boyfriend, she's 2.5 years older than me. Uh, we ended up going to Duran Duran at the Seattle Center in 1984. It was the Seven and the Ragged Tiger tour, and that was a huge, just amazing experience because I was seeing. I mean, I liked the band anyway, and I was just starting to get into the sort of new romantic bands, and later after that, got into bands like like I went back to like Echo and the Bunnymen, who are still one of my favorite groups of all time, and The Cure and things like that. But at the Duran Duran show, I was seeing these beautiful girls. I was 12 years old and seeing these girls just go nuts for these dudes that looked like women and wore makeup. And so immediately with my sister and I, right after that, we moved to Tumwater, Washington, which is right by Olympia. And suddenly we were just like, I was wearing makeup and I'm going to dance clubs in downtown Olympia without any, I mean, we're talking about 21 and over clubs. Somehow a bunch of kids got into these places. And that certainly formed, I mean, that was a big deal because I was with my older sister and we're, at a dance club at 2 a.m. in Olympia. And I guess by that time I was 14. Well, in sixth grade, my first taste of any kind of acting or drama, like theatrical drama, was I was cast as Mr. Rogers in a play that we sixth graders wrote, where Mr. Rogers, for some reason, meets Tom Sawyer and Becky Thatcher and Huck Finn. I don't remember the story exactly, but it was the first time being in front of a bunch of people. I played the part well before Tom Hanks did, obviously. But that was my first taste of being in and I don't think I've never been drawn to being an actor or a performer, but it was part of putting something together. But well, a lot of things. There were a lot of like segueing from like baseball and football into smoking marijuana and cannabis. We call it smoking cannabis, and going to dance clubs. And I kind of, for a while there, as I moved to Olympia from Montesano, which was a pretty big step up, maybe a little bit culturally and a lot in terms of population, and suddenly you're in a big place. But I definitely had kind of a double life, is like hanging out with my sister's new waiver and punk friends, and going to baseball practice the next day and still having some makeup on my face, which actually happened, and that was really funny. But strangely enough, then a third kind of strand came along with the sports and the dance clubs, and it was skateboarding. And once I got a hold of a skateboard and actually, just spend a year learning to ollie and learning to do it straight. If anybody doesn't know, an ollie is when you kick the tail, and it's one of those things you have to know how to do to be able to skateboard, especially today. I won't even go into today's skateboarding because it's insane. The Instagram things you see of skateboarders, it's like this crazy magic. It's like Rodney Mullen times 1,000. And I still love. I watch those videos all the time. But skateboarding was not only something that was you had to have precision, and you had to really practice a lot to get good at it. But it also had a punk rock component, that kind of made me drift more toward that kind of music. And also just the art of, the art, a lot of skateboarders are artists. Mark Gonzalez and Lance Mountain are my all-time two skateboarding heroes for sure. And Mark Gonzalez is an amazing artist in his own right, aside from skateboarding. But just the deck, just the art on the decks and the wheels and, just the aesthetic or the kind of ritualistic kind of putting together of a skateboard and, having a certain pattern as you sometimes use it for transportation, out of your house, and have certain street spots that are perfect for doing whatever. And then, going over to a friend's mini ramp. I definitely would say there's a lot of, art to that. And not to just be a guy who's sitting here talking about all the movies I've seen or the movies I'm obsessed with or inspired by. I think Stacy Peralta is probably the director that's inspired me maybe more than any other, especially in terms of making films, because those early Bones Brigade movies, we watched them 1,000 times and wore out our VHS tapes of them, and they were dubs of dubs, but he combined like, weird little narrative surrealism before I even knew what surrealism was or narrative or anything, and combined it with this, really great skateboarding and sometimes terrible music, but sometimes great music. I'm thinking of Animal Chin. There's a great movie, The Bones Brigade, or Bones Brigade, an autobiography, in which Stacy Peralta goes through every one of those films that they made and, the kind of trajectories of each skater. It's one of my favorite films ever. A VHS camcorder. That was the first time I ever really filmed something like with intention, like my friends, and then I'd have them film me, and it was only editing, of course, like VCR to VCR. But that definitely informed, the need to, want to do this on a bigger scale. And after that, I got a Super 8 camera and started, making, terrible films not involving skateboarding. And then they just got, they eventually, hopefully got better. But that was the impetus, I think, or at least the transition of, something into filmmaking. I think out of skateboarding and going to a lot of punk shows, I think, and I mean, I haven't gotten into music at all, but going to a lot of punk shows in Seattle and Bremerton, which is where I was living at that time. My family moved around a little bit because, or I should say a lot, because my stepdad was in the Washington State Patrol, so he got kind of restationed. But out of skateboarding came, punk shows, seeing GBH in a parking lot in the middle of nowhere, no adults anywhere. And just listening to Descendants music, and there was a place in Olympia. I can't remember the name of it, but the Crazy Eights. Do you know that band? Yeah, they played there a lot. Gesco was the name of the venue. That, I guess, that was less intimidating as far as in the back of my mind wanting to learn how to play guitar, or at least wanting to learn how to write songs. A little bit of crossover with the movie This Is Spinal Tap, which everybody's seen, and it's easy to maybe even overrate that movie, but to me it's right up there in my pantheon, because it was kind of it was a movie that had music in it and seemed real, and it's still mind-blowingly funny comedy. But also there was something about the songs that I loved, that they were a real band that was really playing them, but they actually wrote these funny songs in many regards, spoofing actual heavy metal bands. And I think that, combined with going to punk shows and learning how to play bar chords, and once you can play any, I was going to say Misfits or Ramones song, once you learn those chords, you work your way up and down the fretboard. It becomes less intimidating once you cross certain barriers and I gave up. I mean, I've given up lots of film projects and come back to them. But with guitar, it was hard. It was so hard. I feel like I'm an okay guitar player, but I use it mostly as a device to write silly songs for my movies. But yeah, it was much less intimidating to, see a punk show with, 3 or 4 chords, all bar chords songs, versus, figuring out how to be a really, like a classical guitarist or something like that. Some of those guys are crazy where you got the bar thing and you're doing all this stuff with your.
I know.
It's like magic. It's like those skateboarders that I watch on Instagram. By my early 20s, I think I moved to Portland, pretty much out of high school to go to the film center, and I just came down here to visit. I was living in Bellingham, Washington at the time, and I just thought Portland was amazing because there were so many movies playing. And by that point, I'd say right around 19, it really hit me that I love cinema and I want to learn everything about every movie. In Bellingham, there weren't any video store jobs really available, but I watched as much as I could. I probably saw more movies at age 19, 20 than I have in any year since. Maybe not total, but AMC, the old AMC was, it was like TCM now, as in they only played old movies, and they would have, Buster Keaton films that had never been seen before. I'd never seen. I'd been reading about Sherlock Jr. or Steamboat Bill Jr. or The Cameraman or any of those, and they weren't available. And then suddenly AMC has this marathon, and I recorded every one of them. And I think I remember even setting like timers, to wake up and stop the tape and put a new tape in. So it was kind of like, AMC and video stores just started, being my outlet for you know for I guess for having not gone to real college, and then going to moving to Portland with the actual the exact intention of with the intention of going to the film center, just to get my hands on the equipment, you know. Yeah, when I went to the film center, I definitely yeah, I just wanted to be a writer and a director, and I wrote tons of terrible scripts. One that was okay, and I ended up using the Kodak discount. Back then, you had to think about your film stock. The funniest thing now, I mean, I have no shame about being, you know, the proverbial old school and talking about how it was back in the day, because it's so crazy, it's so different. Um, where, you know, back then the image getting device, the camera and the film, like that's where you put all your money, and spending money on film and developing. Not that you don't, you know, people don't buy cameras now, but it's, I guess, easier than ever just to make that part the cheapest part of your production if you have to. You know, just in the spirit of the low budget films that were coming out in the 90s, in the early 90s, and shot on 16, like the Living End and Clerks and um, some other ones I can't think of right now. The Hours and Times. Did you ever see that one?
Uh, Sounds familiar.
It was only an hour long. It played at Sundance, and it was about the supposed love affair between John Lennon and Brian Epstein. And it's just them in Barcelona, and it's fucking amazing. And just so, you know, so much a product of early 90s cinema, which still definitely has you know, an effect on me. I feel like everything that I do feels like it's you know, it would feel right on a new release shelf in the 90s, just aesthetically, you know, the scrappy or the kind of, you know, it's funny how the 80s kind of blend into the 90s. Sometimes I'll see something that was shot in 93. I'm like, that's got to be like 88, you know? But I do like that. I don't want to say sloppy aesthetic, but I do like the I like that era, and I like that's when I became, you know, came of age as a cinema nerd. I don't know. I've always had I mean, I've always had retail jobs, and I should say that right when I moved to Portland, I got a job at First Stop Video, which finally I had a video store job, you know, and that was a big deal, because then I could, you know, I could feed my habit, and it was cheaper. And you'd literally go home with stacks of tapes. I finished my I finished my editing class, which was like Bushra Azuz. I don't know if you ever heard of her. She passed away a couple years ago, but she was a great teacher. And I took her kind of, it was like a found footage editing class, which was, it was fantastic for somebody who just needed to get their hands on the equipment. Because you're making, you know, you're getting these 16 millimeter old educational films, and you have like a bunch to choose from, and you know, pick clips from them and make something interesting of it. And we transferred our own sound to MagTrack, and, you know, learned how to sync it up and run it together. Um, and also took the 16 millimeter production class, and met a few friends there that I'm still really good friends with today, which is awesome. One guy, Joe Molina, is a colorist in Texas, and my buddy Chris still lives here in Portland, and is really into judo. But he made a couple of films himself too. But what I did with that, I can't remember if I don't think I finished the 16 millimeter production class because I just got started with my own film. No, I finished the class. I just didn't film. I decided not to continue with the whatever it was, the certificate program. Once I decided to rent their, you know, get the super cheap equipment discount and the Kodak discount and make my own feature film, which was called Subculture. I'm pretty sure it was named after the Pixies song Subaculture, which was on their final album, or at least their final album before they got together again, like 20 years later, 25, after he broke up with the band via fax. I like the lore of the Pixies and their music too. But yeah, I decided to just segue that into making a film, a feature film, which was, you know, it was okay. It looked good, black and white, 16 millimeter. We shot it in what is now the Pearl District, and that was 1993. And it'd be interesting to watch. I have the negative and the print from it. That's the thing. This film, Subculture, that I made, the first feature film, and I was 2020 when I made it. And we shot in a bar. I can say this now, all these years later, but we shot in the Cheerful Tortoise, which is right by PSU, and none of us were 21. Didn't matter. The owner was, he was several sheets to the wind and just let us shoot in there. It was crazy. It was like four nights of shooting in a bar. And it was funny because it's terrible. I didn't have any life experience. Again, it looks good, and I kind of want to do something with it now. But it's awful in that it's just an amalgamation of a bunch of things. You can see a lot of Stranger Than Paradise, and you can see like things right out of like Diabolique, the original Clouseau film, which sounds as jarring as it probably is to watch. Um, but ultimately, I wanted to be like the Coen brothers, but just one person.
So
That was my goal because those movies really had an effect on me. Especially Raising Arizona and Miller's Crossing and pretty much everything up until that George Clooney and Catherine Zeta-Jones movie, which I can't even remember the name of. But that was way later. But I love the fact that these guys could make, really like technically perfect and yet really offbeat films that were sort of commercial and had name actors and had millions of dollars behind them. But they they didn't do the things that big movies did. They were nuanced, and it was like this perfect combination of art film and commercial product. In the 16 millimeter class, we actually made a film, and we all had to sign up for a job on it, and I was the camera operator. And I got to say, my focus wasn't great in a key shot. I don't know if I didn't zoom in all the way before I focused or something, or somebody distracted me. But no, we learned just production, nothing in terms of script writing or even production management or anything like that. Although you got a sense of it because you showed up on a set, early in the morning, and then did the film over a couple of days. And so that was a great experience of being on a set with a bunch of people as opposed to just me. Strangely, now I've come around to it's just me again, just because technologically it's gotten easier, and certainly raising money isn't my favorite thing. So in most cases, I'd rather just do something than raise money for 2 years to do it, because by then usually I'm tired of that thing and want to do something else anyway. As per the Coen brothers, I storyboarded everything, and every shot looks just like the storyboard, for better or for worse. And then I did the same thing the very next year. I made another film, which was more written and was kind of a movie in the Blood Simple vein, and that was 60 millimeter color. So that and again, they were all super storyboarded. I did everything that I thought I needed to do to be able to. It does help, of course, if you're making something that's supposed to be a thrillery kind of movie, and the angles are important, and setting up everything and getting the right kind of coverage is important. That's always important, but only after that, maybe several years later, did I start to sort of abandon that and started making movies more freely. And certainly Robert Altman became an influence in my life, more so than any of those directors. And I started making, and years later I got into advertising. And for a while there, I thought I was kind of stuck there. And even though I was 34 or something and had a bunch of features under my belt, including one that was in progress and going to, for my experience, pretty big festivals. Yeah, well, I kept doing, I always worked at video stores, like the whole time I was making these films. That was always my job. A couple of segues into food service. I worked at the Lake Oswego Olive Garden for when you work at a store right when it opens, it means you say you opened the store. I worked there for 2 weeks and then left like in the middle of a shift because I just couldn't. I don't know, it just wasn't my bag. And I worked at Red Robin several years before, and I think I say that because food service and retail work. Not specific to the video store, but definitely, derived from my experience at the video store. As far as dealing with people, those jobs inform so much of my own, just the stories that I've, the original stories I've made up, or characters, or just characters in movies have overwhelmingly come from those experiences. So I don't really, I don't mean to negate that at all, even though I'm never going to work. I don't think I'll ever work in retail again, hopefully. Um, where were we? Say that one more time, the last
Uh,
part. But my filmmaking was just nonstop. Like I was always writing a new script and preparing another film, whether it was going to cost, $8,000 or it was going to somehow, raise $800,000. Sometimes there's not much difference in the film itself, or at least, that's a bad ratio. But if you think about a $10,000 movie versus a $100,000 movie, oftentimes, especially back in the day when you had to shoot on film, there wouldn't be much difference in the film itself. I mean, yes, technically, is it better to have a bunch of people make every shot look great and you only get 10 shots, or is it better to, kind of make a script or a plan for the script to film it appropriately, if it's appropriate to shoot it more verite style or with less finesse or just scrappier, you can have a really good movie with a ton of shots to not only choose from, but to make the movie, flow better and just be a better movie. And I've always gone the way of more shots. Yeah, and it all happened, I mean, a lot of it happened it's just happenstance. Just all of a sudden there's money available and, oh, this could be a bigger thing than it was planned. Um, well, first of all, my friend Melik Malkasian, who's not an actor anymore, he's a computer animator, sadly, because he's one of the best actors ever who, he didn't just turn it on, but he practically did, as in he didn't, do a lot of continual actor upkeep and studying and workshopping and stuff like that. But he always nailed dialogue, and I just loved the way he portrayed characters, and he could always get in the skin of, whomever. And he graduated from PSU in theater, so I had a lot of theater experience. But he was in every one of my movies up until I finally made a documentary, and then by that time he wasn't doing acting anymore anyway. But we made this movie called Film Geek, which originally, I mean, I was 29 years old and working at a video store, but also working a day job for a dental lab. I would deliver crowns and bridges around Lake Oswego, and I had a child. My daughter was just born, so I had to get a real job, and the video store part time. And as I was as I was working on this job, I wore this orange polo shirt, which eventually became the character's orange polo shirt that he wore to his video store job. But it was the only time I ever wrote a script in like 3 weeks, just based on things that I knew that as far as a location that I could write, and we could improv around. Not that the script wasn't written, but it was just one of those things where I knew somebody with a video store. I was teaching some editing courses at the Vancouver School of Arts and Academics up in Vancouver, Washington, and a bunch of my students just became our PAs as we made this film for about $3,000. It was a feature film, and it just didn't cost anything. Everybody worked for free, and it was shot in about 3 weeks. And it was simply done because I had a script and needed to do something while I was working my jobs, and then after 3 weeks of shooting, I edited it for about a year and a half before it was finally done. But um, it was just one of those, just something to do for fun. And then it turned out to be, a movie that kind of helped, snowball into other things. Is that the right word? I don't want to say segue again. It got into a couple of festivals. Sarasota, getting that movie into the Sarasota Film Festival was a festival that I kept returning to with other films. And they're down in Florida, and it was just it was a big deal for that movie at the time and for me. And it was a confidence builder to make the next film. And my goal was to use Melick as my Robert De Niro, like be in every movie. And it worked. It did work for a while before he wasn't. He worked in LA and went out on auditions all the time, but was never interested in the process. Before Film Geek, I made a short film, which I didn't at the time anyway make short films very. I just went right into everything's got to be a feature, which is probably pretty limiting and probably not a great idea that I grasped onto. I made a short film when I lived briefly in Los Angeles. I forgot about LA. I lived briefly in Los Angeles, and Melick did also. And I wrote a short film called The Auteur, in which it was just a character, the same character that you see in the feature film, and he's recording a commentary track for one of his DVD releases. It's just full of stupid puns and his pseudo Mediterranean machismo coming out. He's in the feature film he's described as the Kubrick of porno. And so the whole idea was just to kind of spoof Hollywood and to spoof big movies by making this character sort of like Coppola, sort of like Scorsese, sort of like Kubrick and Fellini, and probably a few more in there. But we did this short film, and it was fun, and it went around to festivals and inspired us to do Film Geek, make a feature film with a completely different character. And then once that movie was done and out, and every movie seems to take at least 3.5, 4 years, all told. I decided to adapt that short, the character from the short into a feature film, and it became probably, I mean, to date, probably at least my biggest, it was the biggest production. Sometimes we had like a crew of 50, but it was still what anybody else would consider micro budget, in that it was like $200,000. But to me, that was a lot of money. And it was, just a movie geared to make people laugh. That was the movie where, I mean, my whole life I've been making films, and it just seems like a bad business model, because you just, you make a movie and then you put it in the market or try to get it into festivals, and that's that's just a bad, right there. It's a bad business model. But I continued that. I pretty much continue that to this day as far as feature films go. But that one in particular, we had a team behind it. So there were people, if it was me, I'd probably entered into a couple festivals and nothing would happen, and I'd get depressed and, go write something tiny or whatever, or go mope for a couple months. But that film got into the Tribeca Film Festival just as a cold submission, which at the time was a big deal. I mean, maybe it's a big deal. It's still a big deal, but it was just one of those surprising things, because usually, there's oftentimes a path to a film festival where, you get it to certain programmers and stuff like that. But this was just a straight up cold submission, and it actually got in. It was fun to later at the festival to meet the interns that were the ones that liked it enough to put it in the pile of of maybes or whatever. It's kind of funny, film festival wise. And again, everything's different now, but it's kind of interesting to learn that kind of after the fact. Honestly, I feel like it's a movie for me. One of my films is complete still to this day when it's on my shelf in a DVD format or Blu-ray. And I still feel that way, even though obviously that's most people watch movies just like with no physical media. But I still feel that that's like the completion point, like that's when it's done. But I mean, you get this, everybody probably gets this, that you get a massive sense of the blues, case of the blues when your movie premieres, and then it seems like it's just kind of over. It's just like there's shadows on a wall, and that's probably why the tangible physical media part is important to me, because it just seems permanent. And even if something's on Netflix or Hulu or Amazon, which all my last three features were all on all of those when it back it was on Netflix, Hulu, Amazon Prime, and but I was still in a video store world where that was not even a big deal. But mostly after the blues go, it helps if you have a lot of screenings, of a particular film, and you can just keep feeling that thing. Especially if you have a comedy, it's kind of easy to gauge if people like it or not, and it's so fun. And the most fun, or at least the most important thing to me is watching people like laugh or cry at a film that I made. And whether it's like the mundane aspects of working in a video store, which, sometimes I'll go into a store, or did back when they were still around, go into a store that I used to work at, and I remember just vacuuming a certain section of carpet, like you do it so many times that it's this mundane thing. But I think that, the boringness that came along with people not coming into the store, was just like a time to kind of dream. And whether that meant, putting something on and being inspired for it, or just literally writing a script while I'm working behind the counter, or, going around to the boxes on the walls and either figuring out what I'm going to watch for that week or that night or whatever, or getting casting ideas from the new release wall. That helped a lot. Before anybody did, anything on the internet, there was looking at boxes and getting casting ideas that way. I did that a lot. Yeah, I think it comes sometimes. Something seems like it'll be really easy to produce. Like I didn't do it because it was easy to produce, but because I had this, at least breadth of even material that I'd shot while working at video stores over the years, kind of creating my own archival material without even knowing what I was doing it for. I had just right when I thought of the idea. Actually, I thought of the idea um, when Mark Mohan, who's a friend of mine, who had a store on Mississippi called Video Verite, and they were all DVD. There's no VHS tapes there. And right around the time he was going out of business, I thought it would be a good idea to archive, at least archive with, like, get an interview and shoot some footage of the store. And that sort of dovetailed into remembering Mike Clark, not remembering, but knowing Mike Clark at Movie Madness and all of his commercials, and like, oh man, that'd be funny to cut them together. And it seems like, who knows how long these things will be around, these actual stores I'm a customer of. And so it kind of started that way with just a couple interviews, and then I just kept thinking I could make this into, something that. Well, again, it archives the experience, like, so that people can see what this used to be like. And it just kept adding stores and just no plan whatsoever with regard to who I was going to talk to next or what shape the movie might take. When I finally started editing, I realized I just had so much material, and I started cutting trailers of the material. And if you watch the movie, it's aesthetically very much like a movie trailer. It's very fast paced, and that's kind of the style I've always liked to work in. I don't know if it's just like wanting to get on to the next thing, and being terrified of having a comedy film that's too long, because we've all seen those films. They just keep going, and they would have been better at 80 minutes rather than the standard 95 or whatever. But it's a movie that I knew I wanted to put together as a feature film, and just kept picking at it for what turned out to be years, while working in advertising and getting a lot of really cool commercial jobs. And it's something I love because it's the same, it's the same material, same process, or same tools. It's just, a different purpose. And I was lucky to be able to work on a lot of things concurrently with the video store movie, as I was collecting interviews and B-roll and kind of structuring out the story, because there's so many things, there's so many directions it could go in. Another thing that's important to me is I have three daughters, and since a long time ago, we've been making little short films together, but particularly in the time between like 2013 and 2018. Like those 5 years, we made lots of just weird little one-off surrealist short films involving skateboarding and porcelain dolls and just weird stuff that made us laugh. And it was just shot with the iPhone and sometimes my EX1 when I felt like busting it out and wanted to deal with those S by S cards. The Mac used to have the slot for them. That was great. Should bring that back. But the aesthetic of those movies, just the grab the shots, kind of, again, it reminded me of the Stacy Peralta films that I love, and kind of that aesthetic and the Stacy Peralta Bones Brigade, kind of just mishmash variety show sort of format kind of started to take shape. And I realized that this felt like a movie that was made by children. And it kind of was, because all my kids are in it throughout. It's almost like an archive of my kids growing up over the years. But that it definitely informed it, and they've been they've been a big part of that particular movie. And when you see a kid age 5 years, it's insane. It's just no CGI create that for you, or any kind of, movie makeup. Um, but so yeah, it became like this thing that I kind of picked at for a while, and then finally, got was able to raise a little bit of money for finding a producer in Philadelphia, of all places, to help really finish the film and to kind of give me time to to edit it, to put all my movie trailers together that I'd made. I literally made a trailer for kind of every subject in the film, and almost a huge, component of each of those trailers is literally part of the film. Well, I'm so still blown away by how easy it is to make something good if you have good actors and a good script. Yeah, well, just film festivals in general to me are hard. I don't like. I mean, sometimes it's fun to do a Q&A. Well, as many times as it's great, it's terrible. It's always awkward, and there's some, I don't know, there's kind of this thing, I don't know, people hold, and I love film festivals. I like to go to them as a patron. But I mean, to me, the greatest thing is just being able to make the thing and to be able to show it to people who appreciate the humor. Or, sorry, I mean, I really do like to make movies that make people, emote. And usually it's in laughter, or some form of crying or being sad. Um, and I brought up technology just because now it's so easy. If you make the kind of films that I make, especially now starting with my movie Rid of Me, I just pared it down and wanted to shoot it like that particular movie, like just a bizarre documentary based on a script I'd written 10 years before. I'd written that script when I was in my mid-20s and filmed it in my mid-30s. And so that created a weird dynamic anyway. And ever since that film, I've been, more and more inclined to just kind of, write a script and then have a conversation with the actor for 8 minutes while filming them. It makes for really rough editing, and that's probably why I spend so much time editing, as opposed to pretty slimmed down shoot schedules. But yeah, being able to just to make the thing, and it helps, of course, that I make a living in advertising, and especially now, I've been able to just make these little videos that segue literally into the film I'm making now, which is kind of a hybrid documentary slash kind of a documentary with dramatic recreations. And I've it just has a slimmed down aesthetic that it has this it's the same tools as what I'm using on these video productions. So it's really easy to kind of flow back and forth between them. And I never expect the narrative or the movies for me, the actual films that I write and direct and edit, to do anything financially, or even, I know how hard it is to get into a film festival, even if you've been to them, been to one, 10 times. Sometimes it's not that easy. And it's certainly, when you're starting out, it's really hard to keep the confidence up that that eventually you're going to get into a film festival,
in the face of rejection.
Oh yeah. You got to really like rejection in this business for sure. And I guess that goes for advertising as well. But I like that I can just keep shooting, and another thing is that I mean, a lot of people. There's a show called How To with John Wilson on HBO Max, and it's fantastic. It's one of my favorite shows I've seen. But it just reminds me of. I mean, I personally have been more often than not starting to film things, like just either with my iPhone or with one of my cameras, and that footage that I capture becomes either part of a script, or I just start making the film that shot, that shot just becomes the first shot of a film, as opposed to writing something first and then kind of finding inspiration, just by virtue of writing. I think that it's a fun way to work. And right now, the film I'm working on now is I'm just compiling a series of my friend Denise telling stories to her old lady friends down in Brookings, Oregon, and I'm just collecting all these stories, and the things that pop out just make it into the movie, and I just kind of and just like kind of letting her life unfold in front of me. It's hard because myself included, I meet so many young filmmakers, and they're just like, I'm going to Sundance with this movie. And they're just like, so just ridiculous. The hard thing is that pop culture and, shows like Entertainment Tonight or whatever the new iteration of that is, fills kids' heads with how easy it seems. And I always say, having lugged films around New York City, literally the film reels, again, I make myself sound really old. Um, you have to really love the movie that you make, because you might be living with it for, 5 years or longer. I mean, you're always going to be living with your movie, hopefully, until your life is over. But as far as like the ins and outs of selling it and showing it to people, getting anybody to like it, you have to really love your film. So the most important thing is to make something that you love, I think, rather than any kind of workshopped or democratic sort of group of people deciding what your movie is going to be about. But when you're starting out, that wouldn't be really the case anyway. But I know that I wasted a lot of time, kind of thinking that my films needed to be something that was already established. And the best thing is just to do what you want to do. But I also think that life experience is a is a really good thing with regard to writing a screenplay, especially. When I became an apartment manager in Los Angeles, that was like real tangible life experience that I got just dealing with tenants issues and the owner and just dealing with kind of and also I'm in LA for the first time, and everybody in my building is Russian except for me. And learning, just dealing with the language barrier and the fact that you're in hot, miserable Hollywood, like right across from the Rock and Roll Ralphs, which made everything really filthy. Garbage would blow over to my building all the time. Uh, so that was just an example of, do something that, if you need a job, look into something that will expand your horizons and, make art out of it if you can.